Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be solubility of inhaled anesthetic gas. So the inhaled anesthetic gas are these gases that we administer to patients via inhalation to put them to sleep or to maintain general anesthesia during a surgical case. So these gas, like any other drug, they have their own pharmacokinetics, and solubility is one of the property of their pharmacokinetic. Now, why does it matter? Solubility gives you a reflection on how much the blood is soluble into the blood. And we're going to see how that affects the brain. The brain is the main organ that we're targeting in anesthesia when we're giving inhaled anesthetic because we want them to sleep. So we want a faster onset for them to sleep, and we also want them to leave faster so we can awaken the patient. Now let's dive into it. I'm gonna put the solubility of each gas, which is also called the blood gas partition coefficient. So that blood gas partition coefficient reflects the solubility of the inhaled anesthetic inside the blood. So the higher your blood gas partition coefficient, the higher solubility you have. So let's put them down. We have desflurane 0.43, and we have nitrous oxide 0.46. We have sevoflurane 0.69, and we have isoflurane 1.4. We have enflurane 1.91, and finally we have halothane 2.3. So these are what they call blood gas partition coefficient. Abbreviated blood gas partition coefficient. So like I said before, if you are greater than 1, that means you are highly soluble. So the higher your blood gas partition coefficient, the higher solubility you have. And if you are less than 1, like these 3, that means you are not soluble in the blood. So let's see how this matter in relation to the brain. So to better understand this, I'm going to draw a simple picture of our lungs, and this is the membrane for the gas exchange, and here this is our blood. This is our blood coming from the pulmonary artery to the lungs, and this blood is going back inside the left atria of the heart through the pulmonary veins. And here we have the lungs with the gas exchanges. And on this side, we're going to say this is our brain, which is the tissue we are targeting. So let's say we administer a drug with a low partition coefficient. What does that mean? So if I administer a drug with low blood gas partition coefficient, it could be desflurane, nitrous oxide, or sevoflurane. Because this is not soluble into the blood, so it's going to have a tendency to stay into the alveoli. And let's understand also how it gets into the brain. Inhaled anesthetic gets into the brain only when the pressure in the alveoli right here is high, and because pressures have tendency to equilibrate, when this pressure is high into the alveoli, then it can diffuse into the brain. So if you want a good diffusion into the brain, you want to have a higher fraction of that inhaled anesthetic inside your alveoli. This is also called the FAFI ratio, but this is another video on itself. I'm trying to just focus on solubility so we can better understand. So low blood gas partition coefficient, they have a low tendency to go inside your blood because they are not soluble that much, these three. So because they can't really get there, so they're gonna accumulate here into your alveoli and diffuse into your brain to equilibrate the pressures. Now, let's say we are administering a high blood gas partition. High blood, a drug with the inhaled anesthetic with a high blood gas partition coefficient. It could be iso, Enfurin, Alloten. So because this inhaled anesthetic loves the blood, is highly soluble, so it's gonna have tendency to go more inside the blood and less. We're gonna have less of it going in the brain. And this is a concept that we really need to understand, because as an anesthetic provider, you make the choice of which of these inhaled anesthetic you're gonna give. Now, some of them are out of the market because of some specific reason, but we need to understand the concept behind this. Now, let's talk about the brain some more. And the blood gas partition coefficient, which is the reflection of the solubility, is only one determinant of the inhaled anesthetic uptake by the brain. Actually, the brain had 4 principal determinants that determine how much of this inhaled anesthetic the brain can uptake. And then we're going to list them here. So the first one is going to be the blood gas partition coefficient, which is the reflection of the solubility of the inhaled anesthetic in the blood. The second one is the fraction of inspire. The third one is going to be the cardiac output. And the fourth one is going to be ventilation. So we're going to talk about this we started talking about the blood gas partition coefficient, and we saw that low blood gas partition coefficient here, they have more tendency to raise the intraalveolar pressure, and when that pressure rises, it can easily diffuse into the brain. But the one with high blood gas partition coefficient, because they are blood soluble, they have a tendency to go more in the blood and less ability to accumulate the pressure into the alveoli. And if you don't have enough pressure, that pressure are not going to equilibrate easily into the brain. So low blood gas partition comparing to high blood gas partition, these ones are going to have a faster onset. Keep in mind that we are targeting the brain with this drug. Faster onset because they accumulate in the alveolar pretty fast, and they're also going to have a faster offset. And these drugs are going to be able to raise your alveolar pressure easily, like we talk about it, which is also the FAFI ratio. And these drugs also are gonna have a low pulmonary circulation uptake because they are not soluble. So low pulmonary circulation uptake, thus higher brain uptake. And the blood with a high blood gas partition coefficient is going to be the opposite. They're going to have a slower onset, a slower offset. They are not going to raise your alveolar pressure that fast, and they're going to have a high pulmonary circulation uptake. Now, let's talk about the fraction of expired drug. It's just a simple way to say, if you put more gas here, you're gonna have also a greater action. The more you put, the more action. It's like you're taking a medicine at 50 milligram versus 100 milligram. So this is simple, and it works for both. If you have a low solubility agent, you put more is gonna get in the brain. If you have a high solubility agent, even though high is gonna go into the blood, but you're giving it a chance to accumulate more to go into the brain. So the fraction of expire is pretty much easier to understand. Now let's talk about the cardiac output, which is another determinant of how much of this inhaled anesthetic gas the brain can uptake. Now the cardiac output, let's say we have a high cardiac output, so we have more blood coming here from the pulmonary artery by the high cardiac output. So the blood with the high blood gas partition coefficient, this inhaled anesthetic right here with high blood gas partition coefficient, because they love the blood, so they're gonna have even a more slower onset. Because cardiac output is high, they're gonna just sink into all that blood coming in and less onset. Now let's talk about the low blood gas partition coefficient. Even though they're gonna get in the brain faster, they will not have a chance to accumulate here into the alveoli, because some of it is gonna go inside with this high cardiac output. So increased cardiac output equal decreases your brain uptake. So if you have a patient who has a really high cardiac output for any other reason, just keep in mind that your inhaled anesthetic will have a slower onset, even more slower for these ones that are blood soluble, because they're gonna just sink in that cardiac output and they will never get into the brain. Now let's talk about ventilation. And here I want to say I uploaded a video about VQ mismatch, and if you haven't watched that video, please do, because it has important concept that can take you on a long run. So if you increase ventilation, so inside the lung, if I increase ventilation, that will give me a decrease in the amount of CO2 I have, because I am exhaling all that CO2. And if I exhale all that CO2, the decrease in CO2 is going to create in my lung bronchoconstriction, because I don't have enough CO2. Now, this is only in the lung. So I'm going to have bronchoconstriction, and because the lung wants to limit the VQ mismatch, the lung is also going to react by decreasing the flow. So I'm going to have less flow coming here because I don't have enough CO2. This is an adjustment process so that we don't have an increased VQ mismatch in the lung when the CO2 is low. So if I have a less flow here, like we talk about cardiac output, less cardiac output, that means higher brain uptake. So just to resume what is going on, increased ventilation, less CO2, you have a decrease of the flow here to limit the amount of VQ mismatch, reducing your cardiac output. And if I reduce my cardiac output, less blood tends to go here and more goes into the brain, which is a sweet thing, right? So if I have an increase in my ventilation, I have an increase in my brain uptake. And that's why. So very important to understand too. Now, what happened after this anesthetic agent go into the blood and it's gonna go into the left atrium, get pumped by the aorta into all the tissue. So what is the determinant into the tissue? And this is called distribution. So what determines how much inhaled anesthetic after diffusing into the blood go into the tissue? That's what we call the distribution of inhaled anesthetic. And so quite a little bit different from the other drug that we take, POIV. This is why this inhaled anesthetic, they have particular pharmacokinetic. So once it gets into the tissue, because the aorta is going to pump the blood into all the tissue, the main determinant of how much the tissue can uptake the inhaled anesthetic is going to be the blood flow. So if I have a higher blood flow, the higher the tissue is going to uptake that drug. And if I have a lower blood flow, the lower the tissue will uptake that drug. But just keep in mind that when we administer inhaled anesthetic, we are targeting the brain. So if we have a low solubility agent with reflecting by a low gas partition coefficient, that drug is going to have a tendency to accumulate into the alveoli. Pressure rises, pressure equilibrates with the brain, it goes in the brain faster, it has a faster onset, and low uptake by pulmonary circulation. Unlike this other agent with a high blood gas partition coefficient, if I give them the law of the blood, they just sink in the blood instead of going into the brain. So they have a slow onset in the brain and they don't accumulate in the alveoli that much because they just go inside the blood. And then we also talk about the FI. The more you give, the more effect you're going to have. Cardiac output. The higher the cardiac output, this drug goes in the blood rather than going into the brain. And the ventilation, if I increase my ventilation, I'm going to end up with a low flow and it's going to increase my brain uptake because it's going to decrease my cardiac output. So I hope, guys, that this video was effective in understanding this concept. If you like it, please share, subscribe, and don't forget to press the notification bell to see my next video. Thank you.